Yeah. I think you mentioned you had a drive with some of the
Google Drive, actually.
yeah. It should give you the stuff that you need to sign in, and then I'll just sync it up to those. Great. Yeah, no problem.
Why would you send it there? That's strange. Never had that happen before. Check your device. What device is it on? That's interesting. Let's reset that, please.
My partner has a state job that's been having to juggle the office and
Yeah,
phones and all that stuff too.
I just thought it would be easier than trying to pull out a thumb drive, which like,
Yeah.
has its own.
Yeah.
Open the YouTube app. Why would it want me to do that? I'm sorry, this is
Oh, no,
not what I
that's-
was
that's
anticipating.
quite all right.
Okay. So that's obviously not working. Can I try another way, please? Yeah. Finally. Okay, so this was definitely getting really nervous about that.
So, and then I'm just gonna. Just gonna have it share the browser here so that remote students have that. Great. All right. So thank you all for being here, either face to face or through Zoom. We really appreciate it. We are incredibly lucky and grateful to have Oregon Rural Action and Stephen Coles from Oregon Rural Action presenting today, telling us a little bit about what they do and some of their communication and work. We really appreciate your time, whether you're a student in COM 310 or an observer from another class coming in. And we will let Stephen go ahead and take it away, and we'll open things up for questions later.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Mann. As Dr. Mann was saying, my name is Stephen Coles. I am the executive assistant at Oregon Rural Action, based here in LaGrande, Oregon. I actually grew up in this area. I graduated from Elgin High School in 2010, went off to do college at Northwest Nazarene University in Nampa, Idaho, and then went and did graduate work out at Duke University. Moved back here in 2020 at the height of the pandemic and found myself in community organizing, and now in front of you all. So thank you for having me and for allowing me to kind of talk about our communications work at Oregon Rural Action. To start off, here is our staff. We are both, our organization has both a staff and a board, and then we work with the community at large, but this is kind of the key staff. So Kristen Anderson Ostrom is our executive director, my boss. And then Zaida Sanchez is our director of community organizing. You'll see myself there as the executive assistant. Ana Maria Rodriguez and Rafael Romero are our community organizers. And then Nella Parks is our senior organizer. This is kind of our small yet core group of individuals that kind of help see the work that we do come to completion. So wanting to give them some space and some gratitude for the amount of effort that we put into our work. A little bit about Oregon Rural Action. We started back in 2002, which seems like a long time ago. We primarily are made up of a diverse community of member groups from individuals here and all across Eastern Oregon. We have focused on education and other forms of outreach and really empowering community to lead community efforts. Our main office is here in LaGrande. We are all over Eastern Oregon. A majority of our team is in Hermiston, Pendleton area, primarily working in Umatilla and Morrow counties. We're really trying to highlight the diverse level of communities that are in Eastern Oregon. We're not just primarily white and male, but we are vast and trying to really empower and build upon those vast qualities and diverse qualities that our area has. Our focus is building a rural movement in Eastern Oregon for the well-being of all people and the environment. That is kind of pushed forward with our mission statement for the working to promote social justice, agriculture and economic sustainability, stewardship of the region's land, air, and water. If you're interested, there is our website. We are actually currently trying to update it so that it's more accessible and accessible across multiple languages as well, recognizing that a lot of our work is done with a large majority of Spanish-speaking population, but there are other languages like Quiche and Hmong that are part of the Mesoamerican indigenous languages that we are trying to highlight as well. So feel free to check out our website at your convenience. A little bit of a roadmap for our conversation today. We're going to talk a little bit about our theory of change, social change and community organizing. We'll hit on a couple of our campaigns, our health equity and water safety, and then kind of how we use our different communication strategies for both of those campaigns, and then kind of what our outcomes ended up looking like. To start off, our theory of change is people. People have the power to change things. We just have to help empower them to work for that change. So people who are directly impacted by specific situations, we can actually build upon that to help the community itself work for change. So people's interests, resources, and leadership are all super important to building a movement from our perspective, and together we can build a more powerful community to help work for change. The interests, resources, leadership, and voice are all based within the community, and it is our kind of job and focus to help rebuild and empower individuals to use the interests, resources, and leadership that they have to work and organize to work for social change. What we mean by organizing for social change is when we begin to see policies and practices change, so that it's not just empowering groups of people to then seek change, but it's actually meeting those changes to the very end, whether that means at a legislative up at the legislative level or down at the local level. But really that our main focus is to empower the people who have the power and resources within themselves to work for that systemic change in policies and practices. One of the ways that we do that is with our health equity work. We partner with Oregon Health Authority and Protecting Oregon Farm Workers to help see Oregon farm workers get vaccinated against COVID-19 and the flu. The purpose here is to actually help change public health. As we saw with the pandemic, there was a lot of individuals deemed as essential workers who had up until that point not been seen as essential. So really trying to make sure that they are given the resources and accessibility needs that they deserve through things like vaccinations and whatnot, especially as the federal government started to mandate that individuals had to be vaccinated against COVID-19 to enter the country and work as farm workers. This primarily is a communication strategy. We were given this grant money to then go out and help educate farm workers about COVID, to give them information and then help put on vaccine events. This meant that we had to use a variety of avenues to get in contact with them and really set up these events so we can start the momentum. The key kind of focus here is on the Latinx farm workers and their knowledge, what their resources are, what they know. So we really partnered with them, listened to them, and then built our communication strategy based on that. Some of those strategies look like a radio show, social media, and one-on-one conversations that I'll kind of break down here in a second. So in March 23rd, Governor Kate Brown shut down the state of Oregon, which thus left us kind of scrambling of what are we supposed to do to get COVID information to farm workers. Primarily, farm workers are Hispanic and speak Spanish. So you can't necessarily go to the farm workers, hand them pamphlets that the CDC or OHA had kind of developed because they would be in English, as well as the level of literacy is varying as well. So you can't go in and just hand pamphlets and hope that people understand and can comprehend what was happening. So what we learned is radio is actually a very pivotal thing in the farm working community. Why? Because it's always playing. It's playing in the fields, it's playing in their cars on their way home, the flux in hours that they have to work, because it's anywhere from 12 to 15 hours that a farm worker is working. And the majority of that time, radio is engaged with them and vice versa. So the state closed down on March 23rd, and March 29th, we got a radio signal. That meant that we can then start promoting not just vaccination events, but offering COVID-19 information in Spanish to a vast majority of people. To date, we've had approximately 150 radio shows. We do radio shows at 11 a.m. on Sundays. It is all in Spanish. We started off having a radio signal, which is really darn difficult to get a hold of. If you don't know about radio, there's like a whole process on how to get a radio signal. We had achieved that because we had a connection with an individual, and then a few months later, that individual actually passed away. So we had to shift very quickly, and we moved to a digital platform, kind of like KEXP, which is based out of Seattle. We have a constant radio signal going through a web browser. And so we were able to kind of keep that momentum going that way. And so through these radio shows, we were able to promote the latest information and data about COVID-19, promote about vaccination events and where individuals can go to get more COVID-19 resources like PPE and whatnot. And the primary focus was that it was all in Spanish, and that we had local and government authorities who also came in and spoke Spanish to speak about the topic of COVID-19. And that primarily happened through our partnership with Oregon Health Authority and using the multitude of resources that the state of Oregon has, as well as the farm worker community in general. So the weekly radio show kind of hit the multitude of the group of the Hispanic and Latinx population in Eastern Oregon. Another strategy that we tried to figure out was social media. Because everything was shut down, we couldn't readily go out and do community organizing, like knocking on doors and other things like that, due to not wanting to expose other individuals to COVID-19. So we went to social media. We primarily use Facebook, but we also have a Twitter and Instagram and even a TikTok. We're not as active on that because I don't want to be doing TikToks all the time. But we primarily do that to post educational information and promote our events. Through that, we recognize that the Latinx population in Eastern Oregon is not just Spanish speaking, but they also speak other Mesoamerican indigenous languages. So when we started to promote events, we started hearing from the community, hey, we're not actually being able to hit the Guatemalan community, for example, who primarily speak Hmong. So we had to think about what are some of the ways that we can digitally organize to reach that community, because none of our staff speak Hmong. We didn't really know anybody else who spoke Hmong. So we went to the community and we started interacting, having one-on-ones, really building relationships, especially with those that are second and third generation immigrants who both spoke Spanish, English, and the Mesoamerican indigenous language of their homeland. There's about 7 other languages outside of Spanish that we're trying to encompass, most of which don't necessarily have a written language, or at least that the state of Oregon isn't printing so that we can't hand out information. But one of the ways that we kind of coupled that is in our promotional videos, we did it both in Spanish and this Mesoamerican indigenous language, bringing somebody on to kind of speak and kind of retell the promotional story. So I have a link to kind of show what one of those videos look like. My hope is that this will work.
La gente hace la invitación a un evento más de vacunación contra el COVID-19. Vamos a contar con las vacunas contra el COVID-19 para los mayores de edad y también para los menores de edad. Tenemos también los refuerzos para los mayores y para los menores de edad, si ya califican. Muchos recursos, mucha información totalmente gratis para. También obtenemos las cajas de comida totalmente gratis para ti. La información en este video o en la descripción del video. Recuerda que también obtenemos la vacuna contra la gripa, así que ven a este gran evento y vacúnate, síguete protegiendo, porque esto aún no se termina.
La segunda, también con vacuna nueva de las 3 vacunas, la 8 vacuna y Pfizer y Moderna, Johnson. Tu vacuna que ya está clara, 5 años, también ya se puede por vacuna. Y también si trabajas de salud, también el vacuna o te van a ayudar, también van a tener unas preguntas sobre el vacuna de tu común. Porque también escuchan que grupos. Tanto puede invitar también y también que no está tomando comida, está mandando todo eso, le ofrecer gratis, acepté también y también quiero dar comida y también gratis, y a mascarilla, y a necesitar a APCHE para que el campo que sea ahí también. También quiero aprender a saber que han examinar ahí, también que hago que también acepté que han chequeado si pueden COVID, ¿sabes? Y para que el mismo campo que sea ahí, y también es gratis. Por eso, igual te han invitar también para que el campo pueda ahí, y también cuidar a la familia también, y también para que también cuidar a la comunidad.
That was just kind of a brief example of some of the work and ways in which we would promote and kind of use the multitude of resources as well as the community itself to promote and communicate what the needs are. We realized through a lot of our promotional videos, as well as like setting up events, that some locations were really important, such as taquerias, places in which would have checks cut for their payment from whether working at food processing or farms. And so really kind of centralizing spaces that were familiar, that were pretty commonplace for everybody to kind of go to, and using those promotional videos to get the information spread as widely as possible. We did a lot of one-on-one conversations that kind of led to that point, as well as at the height of the pandemic, right as soon as vaccines came out, the CDC actually came out this way. And prior to this time, the CDC has been unable to get surveys of any kind regarding the farm working community because there's hesitation on sharing information and potentially being deported. And our team was actually one of the reasons why the CDC was able to get 500 plus surveys done to kind of help build and figure out what the needs are for the community and kind of help bring more resources to the area. So through social media and a weekly radio show, as well as using what the needs are in the community, we were able to kind of build a few different little communications outreach to bring people to vaccination events. Another way that we've done this is actually interviewing farm workers. The video I'm about to show you is about 2 minutes of a farm worker named Liliana, who works at a potato farm. She had huge vaccine hesitancy. She was mostly worried that if she got the vaccine, she knew people were experiencing symptoms after receiving it and couldn't miss work out of fear of losing her job. But she wanted to protect herself, protect her family, and protect the community. So she's going to talk a little bit about that.
¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo estamos? Soy su amigo y servidor Rafael Rojas.
Oh, maybe it'll catch up.
Pero, estamos por parte de ORA un programa de acción. Trajimos las cajas de comida, trajimos el PPE, la protección, señores, a las personas del campo, ¿verdad? Liliana, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estamos?
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
¿Ya se vacunó?
Sí,
¿Lo pensó?
un poquito porque
¿Qué pasaba por su mente antes de vacunar?
muchas dudas, desconfianza por, tú sabes, mucha gente hablando positivo, negativo. Un poquito de desconfianza.
Antes de vacunarse, ¿hubo miedo? ¿Había miedo en usted?
Sí, la verdad sí.
¿Por la vacuna o por el COVID?
Por el COVID, pero también por la vacuna.
Una vez que ya se vacunó, ¿qué sintió?
Yo pienso como que ya, o sea, ya tranquilidad.
Tranquilidad.
Ya paz.
¿Por qué tomó la decisión de vacunar?
Para protección propia y mi familia y gente que está a mi alrededor, compañeros de trabajo.
Liliana, ¿algún mensaje para esas personas que no están vacunados o que están en temor de vacunarse?
Solamente que lo hagan, porque pues esto no es mentira, que hagan, que vacunen. No hay que tener miedo, por todos nosotros.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Liliana. ¿Algo más que quiera agregar a esto?
Gracias a Oregon Rural Acción por tomarnos en cuenta por el regalo de las cajas de comida y a ti, Rafa, pues muchas gracias por estar con nosotros y gracias por estar presente aquí con todos nosotros trabajadores. Muchas gracias.
Let's not watch that again. So as you could see in that video, Liliana was talking about some hesitancy as well as wanting to protect herself, her family, and her coworkers. Also in that video that kind of wasn't mentioned, she was holding a couple bags of KN95 masks that she was then going to hand out to her coworkers, as well as the truck actually belonged to Rafael that was full of food boxes. So another way that we kind of dealt with and worked in our vaccination events was to offer other resources like food boxes and other PPE. Sometimes farm workers could not leave where they were working, so we would go to them. That was another strategy of just trying to make sure that we could meet the community where they're at and meet their needs. So kind of going over the outcomes, the health equity campaign strictly was communication strategy to advance the health equity of the Latinx population in Eastern Oregon to combat COVID-19. That it was primarily farm worker driven and community driven, working together as a collective to see vaccination rates higher to protect the essential farm workers. To date, we've had about a total of 62 vaccination events that range from being at taquerias. We've went to Super Milton Market and other marketplaces, as well as done door-to-door events of going to apartment buildings and asking individuals if they'd like to be vaccinated. Most of the apartments and door-to-door is based on cultural preferences. We worked with Morrow County, for example, who has a high population of Guatemalans, who primarily stay in their own apartment complex just because few individuals speak Hmong or any of the other Mesoamerican indigenous languages. but they're primarily women and kids that were there while the husbands were out working. So we would meet them where they were at and offer vaccinations as well as PPE and food services. As I said earlier, we were able to help the CDC get 500 surveys to kind of talk about fear and hesitancy around COVID-19 as well as health in general. We focused heavily on COVID-19 because that was part of our grant, but we really wanted to see health equity change in Eastern Oregon for the large population of individuals, primarily farm workers. And because of that work, we were able to close a gap. The highest Latinx vaccine rates in Umatilla and Morrow counties, we were able to achieve as of November 7th, vaccination rates from the Latinx and O populations in Morrow and Umatilla counties exceeded the general population by larger margins than any other Oregon counties. That number set at about 72%, and everybody else, including white and other ethnicities, sat at about 76%. So we were able to close that gap within the Latinx population. That kind of covers our health equity work. Now we're moving into our water safety campaign. The purpose of this was to work with individuals in Umatilla and Morrow counties to have access to safe drinking water. What we found was that in the early 1990s, the state had allowed companies that sat along the Columbia River to dump toxic materials into the water. And some of those toxic materials are nitrate, which has negative health implications ranging from blue baby syndrome, which is a lack of oxygen across the totality of the child, or things like stomach cancer, other ulcers, things like that. And that we were seeing these happen largely in groundwater and primarily sources of drinking well water in Umatilla and Morrow counties. This is not a communication strategy. We were asked one day to start testing well water, and then the campaign kind of erupted, but we still kind of led with the same focus of having it be community-led. We wanted the individuals who had well water that tested very high in nitrate to lead this campaign, to ask for change and to demand change. And that our primarily key strategy was testing as many drinking wells as we could to gather data. A lot of that data was collected by entities like the Department of Environment Equity, but not widely shared. So we kind of had to build a lot of our information from the ground up. Our communication strategy for this has been a little trial and error. We primarily figured that we wanted to use media, but we weren't sure what level of media that we wanted to use because that's kind of an overarching term. We knew that this had been a 30+ year problem, that people had hit on it before, but no change had happened. And so what we really wanted to do was bring the magnifying glass to Eastern Oregon and this problem. And one of the ways we did that was build relationships with reporters. We've worked with Oregon Public Broadcasting, Oregon Capital Chronicle, local news sources here like The Observer, the Eastern Oregonian, the Hermiston Herald, to not just kind of promote what was going on, but to actually have reporters come in and experience well testing. What does that look like? How do we get that information to the people? How do we share that with the county? So on and so forth, to continue to help bolster what kind of a problem this is and how big of a problem this is. That also meant that we allowed the community members to speak. We host community safe water meetings about once a month. And that's where we offer education, offer resources like this little graphic here that we actually made into a magnet that communicates what you can do with water that is high in nitrates, and then what you can't do with water that's high in nitrates. We've also offered testing strips. We've helped individuals get their wells tested professionally and processed professionally. And all of that is due to just trying to make this problem as big as possible so that other people can see it from across the state. To date, we've had 11 articles that have mentioned ORA directly and have quoted ORA directly, but we have a total of about 26 articles across the spectrum dating back to May of 2020 that have talked about this issue. and continue to grow as we continue to work with reporters and have reporters show up to our public meetings. Here are some examples of headlines. The top is the Eastern Oregonian Safe Rural Water Community protests against high level of nitrates in the lower Umatilla Basin. Just as an aside, I am learning because I'm not a chemist. Nitrates is incorrect. It's just nitrate because it's only one compound. There are not multiple built up in that. So sometimes headlines can be incorrect as well as I can. The residents in Morrow County demand urgent aid from state for contaminated water. That's from the Oregon Capitol Chronicle, and we worked with that author. Her name is Alex, and she actually came to quite a few of our public meetings, as well as went with us testing door to door. So she got firsthand experience of what that looked like and was able to continue to write articles like this and many more. Outcry over nitrate pollution spurs change to Eastern Oregon Groundwater Committee. That was Oregon Public Broadcasting. The author there is Antonio, and he kind of did the same thing, showing up to water meetings, going to testing as well. And then the Associated Press of Oregon, Oregon County declares emergency over water contamination. Yeah, so using journalists as well as entities like this to really bolster and promote this issue has kind of been our main focus. So some outcomes that have come to this is that we were actually to bring attention to a problem that's been around for 30+ years, as well as bringing to the forefront public's interests, having the people who are suffering most from this experience be able to speak about what they're looking for, what they kind of want the resources to be, and to communicate that they're not going to back down until they have safe, clean drinking water. State Department of Environmental Equity has developed new fines and working with other entities like food processors and large aggregated farms to kind of put in new practices and new laws and regulations, as well as fines to kind of help maintain a level of not continuing to pollute the water that is already polluted. And then working with the Lower Umatilla Basin Groundwater Management Area Committee, mouthful, has changed so that it's not just made up of individuals that might have other interests, but now have been made so that they can bring the community's interests at heart, as well as offering 2 public seats to that committee, which has been the first time that that has happened since their existence. As well as the EPA and other state officials have been sending letters to address the immediate health concerns and trying to help individuals not only receive safe drinking water, but be educated on what nitrate can do to your body and do to those that live in your household. So brief conclusion, the main focus of both of our campaigns has been the community. What's the community's voice? What are their needs? And how best do we help empower and encourage them to lead movements for change? It's the people that have been directly impacted, so we want their voice to be the loudest and most clear. And that has been our kind of goal at ORA, is to literally hold up the megaphone for them to speak as loudly and as clearly as they need. We chose communication strategies, but really it's been trial and error. We've had to figure out what works, recognizing that Facebook is really great for a multitude of things, like putting on promotional videos that are in multiple languages. But due to a variety of reasons, that might not be the most accessible way. So finding ways of actually going into the community, doing one-on-ones, as well as like opening up spaces to have the community kind of communicate what their needs are and what they're looking for. And that effective communication doesn't necessarily mean that we have it all down packed, that we understand this is the best way to communicate. Effective communication is recognizing what works and trying to do that to the best of our ability, and then adapting when something doesn't work. And most of the time that is listening to the community, what the needs of the community are, and then helping that momentum change social and systemic changes in the area. That is all I have. I know it was very quick, a lot of information, but any questions or points of clarification, I'd be happy to hit on.
And folks who are on Zoom are welcome to share a question in the chat or use audio.
Excuse me, I'm Kevin Rye. I'm a professor here in communication as well, and thanks for your presentation. I just wanted to perhaps give an idea.
Okay.
Speaking to the work that you all are doing with water, there's a film perhaps that you've seen. It's called Flow,
Okay.
and it's just being a filmmaker, I'm always sort of thinking it might be a good idea just to hold a screening of that film. It deals with a lot of broader issues with regard to a variety of communities around the world, and water rights and pollution and agriculture, and so that might be something to use as a bit of a platform for discussion in the local area. It's been screened a couple times over the past few years on campus, and I think that they have ways to be able to access the film to screen the film without. So just an idea. It's called Flow, and I think it might speak to many of the concerns that community members are voicing and give a kind of broader perspective too on the issue. So just to putting that out.
Yeah, no, thank you. I actually really appreciate that. We're trying to work with other. Water pollution is such a big thing, and water issues are such a big thing that it's nationwide. I mean, even from Flint, Michigan to here locally, we've got salmon issues that a lot of the tribal nations are trying to figure out and work with the Columbia Basin to try to navigate. So any resources around water that we might be able to use to kind of either bring those conversations together or to kind of bolster the conversations that are happening, I think would be very useful.
Yeah, screening might be an attractive way to kind of invite the audience.
Well, and just recognizing the work that we're doing, at least with the Latinx population, is they're more auditory and more visual. So the ways that we can hit those sort of communicative efforts, the better. So definitely finding screenings and other films that or resources that we might be able to do that with would be very helpful. So thank you.
Thank you for all your work. I totally understand what a challenge it is trying to as you're speaking.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
We've got a question here in the chat.
Let's see what that is. My name is Stephen Coles. I'm the executive assistant at Oregon Rural Action. Good question. I sometimes have to ask myself that every day.
Glad I've had
Any other questions, points of clarification even? I know I talked a little fast.
Okay, I'll ask a question.
Okay.
What are some of the strategies you guys use on social media to ensure that you're reaching your target audience or like a vast amount of people?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. Facebook is a very interesting and complex social media. There's actually a vetting process. I had to go and sign a bunch of documents and get them notarized, sent to Facebook in order for me to post and promote events regarding COVID-19. That falls under a category of social justice. And due to some election fraud on Facebook, they monitor that stuff very closely. So what we would do is when we're promoting for an event, I would be the one posting it, and then we would do what's called boosting. So we're actually paying for individuals to see our content, and we localize that to Umatilla, Morrow, and Union counties, and then kind of bolster that way. So it's not necessarily a natural reach, but from that boosting, we then gained momentum of individuals liking and improving our reach on social media, and thus creating a natural boost now that when if I post and don't pay for the boosting, we kind of get a little bit more momentum than that. And we try to keep it very simple. So the video that I just showed you, we try to let the video speak rather than me putting anything in the description, because that can then also deter individuals from looking at our posts. We also develop flyers and other graphics that we kind of do the same thing, that we just let those pictures and graphics speak for themselves rather than doing a lot of written language. So those were just some of the quick strategies that we do. We use Instagram and Twitter as well, and just kind of the same thing. But again, each social media has their own algorithm and their own way of dealing with things. So it's trying to figure out what's going to be the best approach for each social media. That's a great question. Thank you.
Y'all are following, like, I would imagine, too, engagement metrics in those applications.
Oh, yeah. I get to look at graphs all day long. And so I was trained in philosophy. I was not trained as a communications person. So a lot of this stuff I'm actually having to learn naturally or read or talk with other individuals that do these sort of strategies. Super thankful for things like insights through Facebook to then show reach, number of likes, number of shares, all that other stuff, as well as through our website. We use Squarespace and they create really great graphics around engagement and traffic that help us then be able to adjust where we need to bolster those metrics.
So we have a number of folks here from COM 310, and we had the chance for them to present and share kind of a movement that they developed. So we had some folks who had one about improving infrastructure and support in navigating the area in the snow and hazardous weather. There's been a focus on mental health and support for students, including student athletes. So if I'm a student and I'm excited about and I feel passionate about this issue, and I want to start to get involved in local community and organizing and doing that work, what have you all discovered is that starting point? How do you kind of get what might be in a classroom or this early stage of a movement out there in the world? What are some of the pitfalls to consider avoiding too as you're starting to get it out there?
Yeah, I think I think the best way to kind of answer that question is that our mantra has been failing faster to learn faster. We have a lot of people on our team and a community that's full of passionate people, and we want to monopolize isn't the right word, but we want to empower that and encourage that as much as possible. And sometimes that's really hard to get the ball rolling, right? We've got individuals that call Oregon Rural Action regularly to say, hey, do you have volunteer opportunities? I'm really passionate about X, Y, and Z. How do I get involved? How do I do this? And our response is, that's really great. Let's get you connected with the right people. And part of that is knowing the community, knowing what's available, what the number of resources are. Sometimes we don't know all of those. And luckily, the community is not just made up of one person, but a multitude. So hopefully we can connect them with the right people, with the right agencies. And part of that work is actually us being able to work with other community-based organizations that do other services that we might not. So wraparound services, things like getting hot meals or getting assistance with utilities. Some of our other CBOs we work with, if somebody called me and said, hey, I'm really passionate about OHP and getting individuals who may be undocumented getting on OHP since that law recently passed, I would encourage them to get in connection with local groups here like NEON, where that's kind of their main focus is helping individuals get on Oregon Health Plan. So part of it is just knowing what's available and then really just encouraging that natural passionate behavior and really getting them connected to keep that momentum going. Sometimes it's easier to do than other situations, but it's based on kind of the conversations that we've had with the community and how we can get people connected.
Kind of building on that, can you speak a little bit to some of the coalitions or other organizations or groups that you've worked with? What does that collaboration look like? How do you form those kind of connections and work and communicate with those groups?
Yeah, sometimes it's really a delicate dance. Sometimes you have to figure out what are the interests of other people. That's a really important question across communications and particularly community organizing is what's their interests? What are they kind of looking for? So when we've partnered with other community-based organizations, we've had conversations and kind of figured out similar interests and how can we partner together to make like a vaccine event more equitable for everybody involved. I mentioned NEON earlier. We also work with the migrant education program that's based at a Blue Mountain Community College there in the Hermiston area. They primarily work with Latinx families. And so being able to bring them to events meant that they were able to offer other resources around education and food that we per se couldn't offer ourselves. So figuring out what other community-based organizations have and how can we work together with similar interests to kind of see a goal be met. And that means having more intense conversations and figuring out what those related interests are and how can we build upon those. If that answers your question.
Oh yeah, absolutely. My partner ran a disability rights nonprofit for several years in Utah, and that delicate nature of it is really a challenge. There was like that example, a scooter company that wanted to work with them, but also kind of wanted to monopolize.
Yeah,
Is like, how do you balance accessibility with
absolutely.
people leaving scooters in the middle of the road? So
Right.
it can be a challenge.
Well, and I will say people are both really great and very complicated. And so with any sort of strategy that we're doing is recognizing that everybody has their own level of interests and their own kind of desires of what they want to see complete. It's just that how can we work together to see those similar interests or our shared interests kind of come to a collective good outcome or a positive outcome. So yeah.
Kind of towards the end of your presentation, a little bit of answering other questions, you mentioned failure.
Mhm.
And I'm just kind of curious about what's been the biggest failure so far for you guys and how you were able, what steps you took and the things that you did to try to make it less of a failure.
Absolutely. So failure is a really tricky, interesting thing. I think a lot of our Americanized culture sees failure as like, that's it, you failed, game over. And that's not the case. The majority of the time we're kind of taught, especially at a young age, like you just pick yourself up by your bootstraps and try again. It's not quite like that. We have to figure out what works and what doesn't work, and that's trial and error. And sometimes that means that we make a certain post on Facebook and it just plummets. So then we figure out, well, why did it plummet? Why did was the communication off? Did we not have subtitles on the video? Did we not have it in multiple languages? Did we post it at the wrong time even? So part of that is trial and error, figuring out what's going to work and what's not going to work. And failure almost sometimes seems like a constant, like we're not sure when we're going to fail or how we're going to fail, but it's going to happen. So our best is to adapt and try to shift with those pitfalls. An example that maybe isn't necessarily a failure because it didn't end up being a failure, but we hosted an event called Dia del Nino, which was on April 30th. And it was in McKinsey Park in Hermiston, and it was going to be this beautiful big day, just celebrating kids. We had over 1,000 toys to hand out and donate. We had cakes on piñatas, like full day. The forecast said rain, and it was a torrential downpour. And that was right before our event started at 10:30. We were supposed to start at 11. At 11:15, we had 2 big trucks pull up, and they had huge tents to then set up. We had 3 of those kind of big outdoor event tents all stuck together. And we had 335 people present at that event that stayed throughout the entirety. So it wasn't a failure. We couldn't predict Mother Nature, but we adapted quickly. We were able to get on the phone with a company that was able to do tents. They were there within 10 minutes and it worked seamlessly. So sometimes failure looks like that we didn't predict enough that, weather would be an option or a situation that we'd have to deal with. And then sometimes it's as simple as like, well, we didn't post at the right time and now nobody knows about our event and they're not going to show up. But what we're thankful for is even in the midst of our failures, with the level of connection that we have with the community and everything being community-led, natural advertisement sort of happens and people coming in and jumping in to help in whatever needs. The individuals who had the tents for Dia del Nino was actually a community member's dad. And he just jumped in head first, no questions asked, and then continues to support us from that point on. So that's a little bit of like how our failures worked and how we've adapted and kind of worked with those. Yeah.
So what has been the most difficult part of working for Oregon Rural Action? Would it be like outreach, communication, the language barriers, something completely different?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. For me, I mean, I grew up here. I don't speak Spanish. I barely speak English, and I studied the humanities, primarily philosophy. So when I got this job, I started off as an office manager, which I know how to run an office. I can do that. If you ask me to go outside, I've got problems. Like, I love to talk to people, but sometimes, again, people are super great, but not always the best. So what has been the most difficult is that my natural inclination to be a helper and to do the best that I can is sometimes met with my own inability to do something. The majority of my team speaks Spanish, and I work very, very hard at trying to speak Spanish. I also have a severe learning disability. I have a non-working memory. So things like language are already difficult for me. But luckily, my team is both very encouraging and helpful in educating me in Spanish, as well as just community organizing is not. I'm sure there are programs in our country where you can go and study community organizing, but it's not a simple discipline. There's not one right fit all for everything. So again, learning by failure, learning by adapting is kind of the main focus. And I'm naturally not that way. I don't want to fail. I'm a perfectionist. I want everything to go right the first time. Hardly does things go right the first time in life. So it's I guess the hardest part has been allowing myself to be re-educated and be in a state of constant learning, which actually has then led me to grow and for our team to grow and be able to meet the community better, just because we're taking that stance of being open to learning and understanding more. Thank you for that question. Yeah.
So being so involved with the community, who would you say your biggest community partners are?
Honestly, it would be the farm workers themselves. It's so vast because they all work for very different farms. But there's such a need. And these people are filled with so much passion and love for themselves and their families and their communities that when we listen to their stories, when we listen to individuals like Liliana, and they see us showing up, and they see us putting on these events, that we're offering PPE, that we're offering resources that individuals are asking for. They're our biggest cheerleaders. They're the first people to help us set up, the first people to help us take down, even after they've worked 12, 15 hours. So it's not just one localized like group or entity, it's the totality of the farm workers in Umatilla, Morrow County primarily. And it's their willingness to trust us and partner with us. And a lot of that had to be built by being present with them at the farms, by meeting them where they were at, by listening to their stories and listening to how the area has treated them and how other individuals and entities and resources have treated them, and really trying to work for the systemic change to make things better for everybody involved. So not one specific entity, but the farm workers as a whole are, they make me come to work every day, and they make me check myself and check my whiteness in such a way that they also want to encourage me when I'm the one trying to meet them and encourage them and help offer them resources. So it's just this beautiful relationship that we're able to partner together and work for systemic change. Thank you.
Perhaps a general question. Can you speak into the importance of writing within the organization, and what perhaps kinds of writing do you do? Perhaps I have grant writing background, and what the importance of being able to write for specific purposes. I think that might kind of illuminate some ideas for students.
Yeah. So writing again is a really tricky area for us, because we notice that the community is mostly auditory and visual. So in conjunction to like working with the community and organizing the community, we actually try not to write as much as possible, just because it ends up being a barrier. We try more than anything to offer translation services and other ways to kind of meet folks where they're at. Grant writing, a little bit different. Our executive director, bless her heart, is going through all of that. And that's a little bit of a different beast, if you will. There's different levels of expectations. We've got restricted, non-restricted grant funds. The main sort of issue there, though, in grant writing is how do you communicate kind of our promotional videos, our testimonies, kind of how we're engaging with the community in words when we're primarily working in visual and auditory spaces. Luckily, things like the testimonies and other promotional videos we can share, and that will actually, we can just use those to help with our grant writing. But a lot of the time it's writing something, submitting it to an online form, and hope that they understand and read. That's also another primary reason why with our water campaign, we're working very closely with news stations and journalists, because they can not only help better tell that story, but then amplify that story, and then we can share it. So that we're not naturally always writing that. We did do quite a few press releases for our water campaign. That was thanks to the help of Nella Parks and Zaida Sanchez and Kristen Anderson Ostrom to kind of bring that together to then post on our website, as well as share with those news sources. But it's a really tricky, delicate dance, because again, we have to know what the interests are of these foundations, of these grants, and how do we tell our story effectively through the means of a medium that we're not used to using, or that isn't kind of a part of our communication strategy. So again, it's another weird dance that we're trying to figure out, and luckily our executive director is really good at it. So we're able to all partner together to kind of help out and like those specific press releases or grant foundation work. Grant writing is what beyond me. I actually have a book at my desk that's a grant writing for dummies, so that I can try to like highlight what are some things that we need to make sure that we hit on. So yeah, it's a skill set in its own.
We have a grant writing course here too.
Oh, nice.
If that's an area anybody's interested in.
Might need to sign up.
I know we've had you in the hot seat for a bit. Are there any other remaining pressing questions you'd like to ask? Yeah, well, we really want to thank you for your time. Why don't we receive a round of applause for
Thank you.
sharing, again, we've spent a lot of time this term talking about what social movements do, looking at examples of social change, but it is so valuable to see these examples in practice. And we really appreciate not only getting to understand, that falling forward and continuing to learn through that process, but also, ways to be involved, ways to participate, ways to take what, we might be really interested and passionate about and try to get that out into the community. So, we really appreciate your time and engagement. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad we could make that happen. So if you are a student in COM 310, why don't you stick around here just for a couple more minutes? If you're here for extra credit, here from another class, you're welcome to take off when you're ready. So we'll just, for this class, wrap up, have just a couple announcements and updates for you. And here for the there's still information just so that we can check out.
Okay. So they kind of small.
Yeah, wherever the in-person and all that needs to be. I don't know if you all work out how that be personally or to.
I honestly didn't even know that options.
Yeah, another option is if that's something you want to just base on, if you're willing to like and that could work too. That way. I just want to make sure that we're not, leaving you hanging on. Really appreciate the time. A little bit of support back for all that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll work with my executive director to get that stuff, and then we'll most likely scan it and upload it to you.
Yeah. Well, it was great to meet you.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. Again, I think super informative, super helpful. We really got a lot out of that, so I appreciate it.
Well, again, thank you for the time and for the platform.
Absolutely.
Just need to make sure that I sign up in there.
Yeah.
It was such a hassle to get it.
Sorry about that. I think
No,
I
think it was me too. So it's just like Google is its own thing. So
yeah, and our internet's been really wonky today too. So
perfect.
yeah, thank you.
And then one last little quick thing, you can find my email address at the website oregonrural.org. My email would be stevenc@oregonrural.org. Thank you for letting me chat for a little bit. Hopefully it wasn't too boring for y'all. Really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So for folks here for pre-10, again, thank you for your great questions and participation and input here. I really enjoyed getting to see that and learn from Stephen. So this is our last class meeting of the term. So we just have, we have the final exam, but we're not going to be on campus for that time. We don't have a final exam in this class. I just wanted to give you a couple updates, things to know as we're wrapping up here. So first of all, you should have received last week a link to course evaluations. I know several of you have done those already. If you haven't, please try to get those done by the end of the week. Since this is the first time this class has been offered at EOU, it's super helpful for me to know what worked, what didn't, things to change, modify, all that good stuff. So thanks for doing that. Second thing is we have just your final write-up that'll be due on the 14th. That's just asking you to take or to take your creative movement presentation and to reflect on what you developed, why you chose to develop it the way that you did. So I will grade your presentation based on both the write-up and the presentation that you did on Monday or through video. And then the last thing is, so I was kind of waiting to see what presentation we get, what we talked about, so that I could build the prompt around that. But I also know that that's a short window of time. So what I'll do is, if you have completed 5 of the Canvas prompts, then you're good to go, and I won't require a 6th. But what I will be doing is posting a prompt on Canvas that is asking you to kind of reflect and to think about this presentation, what you learned from all of that. And if you turn that in by the 14th, then that'll just be an extra credit opportunity. So I want to be fair in giving you time. I don't think that it would be fair to give you a prompt right now that you have to complete by Sunday. So I think just giving an extra credit that you can do this next week would be an easy thing to do. If you do it, it'll add 20 points or 2% onto your grade. So, and then all of the remaining assignments, continuing to work through those. The Canvas prompts and all of that should be showing up in the next few weeks. Just remember any remaining assignments to get those in by the end of the day on the 14th. So I like to wrap up each class by sharing some of the things that I hope that you have learned and taken away from that experience. The first thing is that we can kind of understand a little bit more of the theory and fundamentals. A lot of you have brought in some really good discussions and ideas about how we can use things like Griffin stages, about rhetoric, a lot of those kind of older pieces and current topics are things that I think give us a groundwork to understand what all is going on. Like a lot of your questions and engagement really show like we're thinking about these foundational ideas and we're thinking about how to use social media to communicate. The second thing that I hope that you've developed is this more kind of practical applied knowledge. What we learned from the presentation, where do we use this communication? How can we put this out there in the world, right? And to think about, I think lastly, how you're able to go and do that, right? I'm not saying that everybody is necessarily going to take a presentation that they do for this class and put it out there, but I hope that this has helped you in terms of thinking about issues and topics that you're interested in and might want to get involved in, and developing a better sense of how to go out and do that and to understand what works and what that looks like. I think that in thinking about communication and the way that communication changes, I really like Stephen's points about us falling forward, right? Of us failing, learning from those failures, changing, communication, our strategies, our tactics, our methods, they're always adapting, they're adjusting, being modified. I still think it's really exciting for us to continue to learn how we can be involved, how we can participate, and keep pace with those changes. So I hope that this course has helped in building a vocabulary on how to do that and how to do that. So yeah, any remaining questions or things that I can chat with you about you might have as concerns before we finish up? Awesome. Well, you know, again, I've been really excited and grateful about the opportunity to teach this class. I really appreciated your active participation, your engagement, your involvement, your questions. That's really done a whole lot to make this, I think, really interesting. I was really impressed with your presentations on Monday. I know now that we're here at the end of the term that you've got a lot of final assignments, things to do, things to turn in. And I know it can be a little bit of chaos in the next week. So best of luck as you're wrapping up for your classes. I will be continuing to be available through email and office hours to help you out on anything you're navigating through. Again, I really appreciate your time. I'll be teaching public speaking in small group in the winter. If I don't see you there, I hope to see you again around or in a future class. And again, I really appreciate all of your hard work, your time, your engagement.